Let's cross back to Canberra now and catch up with Labor's Resources and Agriculture spokesman Joel Fitzgibbon. Thanks for joining us, Joel.
Our pleasure, Chris.
Just first up, I want to get you on the coronavirus issues, the way it's playing out, the prospect that there could be more travel bans. We'll see what happens there. But obviously the Reserve Bank reducing interest rates today, clearly a direct reaction to what damage this virus might do, this pandemic might do to the economy. Has the government got the settings right on all of this?
Before I go there, Chris, can you do me a favour? Next time you have John Barilaro on, the Deputy Premier of New South Wales, can you just remind him he's been in government for 9 years and serves in the second most senior position in the government? He can't behave like someone in opposition all of the time. I mean, like the mob down here, he has a secret coalition agreement with the government which gives him a big car and a big salary and lots of staff and the title of Deputy Prime Minister. Yet he wants to act like an opposition, someone, you know, on the backbench in opposition. You can't have it both ways, Chris. But,
well, no, it's a good point. I mean, he's in that cabinet. He's the Deputy Premier. But that's why I asked him whether he'd raised his concerns about the 2050 target in cabinet to try and change it. It's no point, as you say, behaving like an oppositionist. But that's like having the Otis group in Canberra in the Labor Party, isn't it? Isn't that a little oppositionist group?
Well, isn't an admission to his inadequacies? He says he keeps raising these things, but nothing ever changes. Nothing ever changes. And of course, he threw David Littleproud, the minister down here, under the bus. Littleproud's trying to blame the New South Wales government for the fact that people affected by the bushfires, in particular small business, aren't getting assistance. And he tells you on your program, it's a scoop for you, that he'd actually written to Littleproud saying that the guidelines set by Littleproud are too difficult, and that's why the New South Wales government has been unsuccessful in getting this assistance out to people. So they're at war with one another, but John Barilaro is in a war with his own government, but seems totally ineffectual and unable to change government policy.
Well, he's certainly at war with them. He's certainly running different lines to them, but I happen to think he's running very sensible lines. I think what should happen here is they need to get John Barilaro into Canberra and start running some of these sensible lines nationally, and you ought to go into state politics because New South Wales Labor needs a decent leader.
No, then John will come to Canberra and do exactly the same thing Barnaby Joyce and the other Nats do. They scream and kick and make lots of noise. They say they're going to build dams, but they never do any of these things. I mean, they just take the money, Chris. I mean, Blackjack McEwen, Doug Anthony, Tim Fisher would be, you know, rolling in their graves if they saw the way the Nats of the 21st century are bullied by the Libs in the way this mob are. I mean, it's just hopeless. They can't be activists. They've got to be politicians.
All grist for the mill, and we'll make sure John Barilaro hears about all that. But I need to get you on some federal issues. First up, very quickly, the government's settings on the coronavirus about right?
Look, I think what's most important here, Chris, is bipartisanship. We were rightly critical of Scott Morrison's failure over the summer months. I think he's learned some lessons from that. He's picked up his game. A little bit of the arrogance seems to have disappeared on what is a really serious issues. We've got to have confidence and faith in the government, which of course is behind the steering wheel, getting all the advice both nationally and internationally. We appreciate the fact that we are being briefed on a regular basis. Chris Bowen in particular. Chris is running a line over everything they do, and I think so far we're satisfied by the response.
Yeah, you're still going in very hard on this sports rorts caper. Look, obviously, I've said many times, it was an obvious boondoggle. I think most people understand that. There's politics involved in the way the grants are handed out. But if the Prime Minister was suggesting any preferences to the Minister, that's hardly a problem, is it? That's exactly what we expect Prime Ministers to do.
Well, why wouldn't we go hard, Chris? I mean, we have a Prime Minister not tortured by self-doubt, full of arrogance when he was first challenged. Of course, he's been absolutely caught out now in Senate estimates at the hands of no less than the independent Australian National Audit Office. And all of us in our constituencies, Chris, have hard-working volunteers in their sporting clubs who worked overtime in addition to working on the chook raffles and everything else they need to do, the time they spend with their children, only to spend hours and hours and hours filling out these forms, and then only to be dudded because the merit wasn't followed. Rather, Scott Morrison's political interests were the guiding light for how these grants were allocated. And when they see projects like the North Sydney swimming pool getting money out of a regional grant fund, then they are entitled to be angry, and we are entitled to go after the government very hard on their behalf.
You are indeed, but you don't expect to get the Prime Minister's scalp here. Why were you just delving into the entrails so much? Aren't there bigger issues for Anthony Albanese and Federal Labor to concentrate on?
What is the bigger issue than the accountability of a government that has been caught red-handed but won't even take a debate in the Parliament on the matter? Yeah, coronavirus, the economy which is tanking, bushfires, all of these things are really important, what they are doing to GP services in the bush. We are talking about those things for most of the day.
They did flick a minister. There's a minister who's lost her job over it. Just sorry to hurry you along, but I thought you might want to tell us what you think about this revelation now directly from the Prime Minister after months of avoiding the question that he did in fact put Pastor Brian Houston's name up for a visit to the White House. So obviously the White House rejected it.
Well, the Prime Minister has stood now in the House of Representatives and said there's nothing to see on sports frauds. He did the same thing at the National Press Club. He misled in terms of his Hawaiian holiday during the bushfire season, tried to hide that from the Australian community. And now we learned that when he looked down the barrel of the camera, refusing to answer, describing the Houston thing as only as gossip, he refused to answer that question at least 6 times, Chris. And now, for some reason, and we might still find out why in the not-too-distant future, he's had an epiphany and he's admitted that he was the person who recommended to the White House that Houston be invited to that dinner.
Joel Fitzgibbon, thanks for joining us.
Our pleasure, Chris.
Federal Labor's Joel Fitzgibbon there. I'd love to get him and John Barilaro on the show at the same time. I think we could have a good chat.